Good afternoon, and I'm Latha. I work as Associate Professor in the Department of English, St. Teresa's College. I think it is indeed a pleasure to see Ms. Ghose here, because it is actually our second meeting, and I feel blessed and privileged to interact with her once again. Sagarika, with all our love and joy, we welcome you to Kerala once again, especially to Calicut. All of us have known Indira Gandhi as the Queen of India. There is so much of mystery and enigma that IG has created in the life of Indians. And here is an amazing woman writing about the most powerful Prime Minister of India, Indira Gandhi. I think most of you might be knowing about Sagarika Ghose. She is very popular. She has got a tremendous fan following. But even then, I think I owe it to the audience to reveal at least some information personal about you as a journalist as well as a woman. Please.
Thank you very much to the Kerala Literature Festival for having me. It's always a joy to be in Kerala. I love Kerala, love everything about Kerala. And as you notice, I'm even wearing a Kerala sari. And it's a joy and a privilege and an honor to be here with my friend, Latha Nair, who I had the privilege of being in conversation with on a previous occasion. And it was a real meeting of minds and a joint singing of the soul. We are friends, although we don't know each other that well, but we've hit it off so easily and share such a comfort factor and such a meeting of minds. So it's a joy to be here with Latha. And a wonderful privilege to be here with you and to share my thoughts about what's happening today and about the writerly world, and of course about my book, Indira Gandhi. I am a journalist and a writer. These are not good times for journalism in India. Breaking news has become broken news. I think there is a lot of pressure on the media today. Journalists are not what they used to be. And I'm just worried that one day we might have to say, freedom of the press, rest in peace. Will we have to say that? So it's a sad day for the media. As a journalist, I feel very disappointed and disillusioned by what's happening to journalism, what's happening to the culture of dissent, which is why it's wonderful to breathe the fresh air of Kerala and to breathe the fresh air of democracy and dissent that I know still exists here.
There are a lot of controversies that are built around the book. And when you, especially with you writing the book, there were controversies saying that the Congress actually commissioned this book, commissioned you to write this book to popularize the spirit of Indira. Would you like to say something about the book being apolitical?
I was commissioned to do this book, but not by the Congress, but by Juggernaut Publishers. And the Congress is, I don't think, happy with the kind of political treatment I've given Indira Gandhi, because I've been scathing about her politics and scathing about the kind of politics she practiced. But I was drawn between, I was torn between Indira Gandhi, the politician who I disapproved of, who was not a democrat, who was an authoritarian leader, who was a centralizing leader, who stamped on democracy, who destroyed the Congress party, who brought dynastic politics to the center stage of democracy. So I disapprove of her politics, but I found myself very sympathetic to her as a person. I was commissioned to do this book last year, which was the 100 years of Indira Gandhi. And in a way, I discovered that Indira Gandhi actually is still ruling India because she wrote the rules of modern Indian politics. Any politician today who is a supremo in the government, supremo in the party, colliding with institutions, colliding with the judiciary, colliding with the press, colliding with the civil service, trying to create a one-man show or a one-woman show, whether it's Jayalalitha, Nitish Kumar, Mamta Banerjee, Mr. Stalin in Tamil Nadu, all these leaders, and of course Mr. Narendra Modi. They are all wannabe Indira Gandhis. They are all playing by the Indira Gandhi playbook. So in a sense, Indira Gandhi wrote the playbook of modern Indian politics. They are all trying to be Indira Gandhi. I think Mr. Modi is trying very hard to be Indira Gandhi, but he's still not being able to manage it really.
So would you please share with us your experiences when you started writing this book, which was commissioned, as you said, by Nandini Mehta and
Chikri Sarkar of... well, Latha, it was a marvelous journey. It was a marvelous journey. And it was a process of uncovering a woman who I think all of us somehow share an intimate relationship with. You must have been alive when Indira Gandhi died, right? Very much. Somehow 31st October 1984, how many here were alive in 31st October 1984? Raise your hands. And everybody remembers exactly what they were doing, right? Everybody remembers exactly what they were doing when Indira Gandhi was assassinated. We don't remember what we were doing when Sanjay Gandhi or Rajiv Gandhi, but when Indira Gandhi was assassinated, we all remember exactly what we were doing. For my generation, as I've said, it was a trial by fire. It was a baptism by fire into adulthood. It was a time when our generation grew up. We suddenly became aware of the blood-stained country that we were part of. And suddenly the figure who had been the constant presence in the citadel, the queen, was gone. It was like as if, if this Shamiana roof suddenly blew out. It was like that. And I discovered through the process of researching her life, a very complicated personality with multi-layers. There was a very interesting statement that one of her biographers has written, and I've quoted it in the book. It says, Indira Gandhi did not like Feroz Gandhi, but she loved him. So Indira Gandhi was the woman who loved what she didn't like. She loved Indian democracy, but she didn't like Indian democracy. She loved Indian politics, but she didn't like Indian politicians and she manipulated them. She loved the freedom of the press, but she didn't like freedom of the press. She loved her father, she didn't like her father. She loved her sons, but she didn't like her sons sometimes. She loved, she loved the process of democracy, but she also didn't like democracy and tried to stamp it out. So Indira Gandhi was the person who loved what she didn't like. And I think in that sense, it sums up to me this complicated person she was. The last time we spoke, Latha, we spoke of the Lady of Shalott. I don't know if any of you know Tennyson's poem, The Lady of Shalott, who is imprisoned in a castle and is a beautiful woman, but is imprisoned in a castle of her own anxieties. And I think the process of uncovering this very fascinating, multi-layered character who was good and who was wicked, who was angelic and who was satanic, who was capable of immense acts of generosity, who was also capable of immense acts of vindictiveness and ruthlessness, who was a ruthless power politician, but also a nurturing female at home, who was the Virgin Mary when it came to children and the downtrodden, but who was the avenging Kali when it came to her enemies. So she lived in light and darkness. She was good and bad. She was angelic and she was wicked. And I think that's what makes her so interestingly seductive for me. That's what makes her, as a writer, you're always interested in the darker side. You're interested in the shades of light and dark. You're not always interested in only the good or only the bad, but you're interested in the interplay. And I think that was what interested me about her, is that the child of Nehru who stamped out democracy, the nurturing mother who turned into a devil with her peers. She was so many different things to so many different people. And what came to me often was the strain of darkness, the strain of ruthlessness and darkness. And I think that was what was undeniable about Indira Gandhi and what drew me to her.
So, as Sagarika pointed out, that is, you quoted, significant parts of Indira Gandhi's speeches.
Yeah.
And the woman, as I read through the book, it is a book which not presents, but it represents the fascinating story of Indira Gandhi as a most powerful prime minister. But a woman who said, when I die, every single drop of my blood will invigorate India and strengthen it. A woman who loved India so much, but a woman who became a nightmare for the people of India. Was Indira Gandhi the most powerful prime minister? That is a question that confronts me as a reader when I go through this book.
That's a very good question. And why have I called her the most powerful prime minister? Simply because she was about the pursuit of power. Indira Gandhi was about the ruthless pursuit of power. And no other prime minister has ruled supreme for 20 years. I think Mr. Modi would like to be the most powerful prime minister, but he's only ruled for 4 years. So we have to see whether he's able to manage Indira Gandhi's record. But as far as I'm concerned, in the way she pursued power, her use of power, her demonstrations of power, the manner in which she was able to show that she was wielding power, I think that's what made her the most powerful prime minister. I mean, think about it, 1971 war. I don't know how many of you were alive in 1971 war. The whole world turned its back on India. India was alone in the world. Europe turned its back on India. Britain turned its back on India. She went to the United States seeking help because millions of refugees were pouring in from East Pakistan. She went to Nixon to seek help. Nixon called her a bitch. He called her a witch. He said Indians are repulsive people. Why do they breed? Why are Indians, why do they exist? They're such repulsive people. The refugees that are pouring in, they should be shot. This was the kind of reaction she had from Nixon. When the war broke out, the United States sent the 7th Fleet, headed by the nuclear warship, the Enterprise, to steam into the Bay of Bengal and terrorize India. And of course, patrolling the waters of India at that time was the brave warship, the INS Vikrant, which was there confronting the US 7th Fleet. And the commander of the INS Vikrant, who I interviewed, I haven't quoted it in the book, but I interviewed him. And the Vikrant was patrolling the waters when they saw the 7th Fleet approach. And the commander sent a message to the Prime Minister saying, what shall we do when the 7th Fleet approaches? And Indira Gandhi, without batting an eyelid, said, well, you wish him a very good morning. And so she was completely undeterred by what the US was trying to do. When she declared war on Bangladesh, when she declared war, the next day she went to a public gathering at the Ramlila Maidan in Delhi with warships circling overhead because they were scared that there would be an airstrike. And she said, not by a single step will we move back. Alone in the world, isolated, America's threatening you, America's terrorizing you, the lone woman with Generals Manekshaw and Arora by her side invades East Pakistan. The war is over in 14 days. It's never happened in the history of the world. In the history of the world, a country has never been created in 14 days. It's never happened. She created the country, came out of that, announced in parliament, we have liberated Bangladesh, we have split Pakistan into two. What happened after that? Abhinav Chandi Durga. You know, she became Shakti. She was at the very height of her powers. The Economist magazine called her Empress of India, Vicereine, Goddess of India. So she went to the very height of power, and it was on the dint of this decisive military victory that she was able to achieve. So in that sense, you know, she wielded power, the ability to wield both political power, military power, the ability to play power politics was at the root of her politics. This was the politics of cult of personality. But you have to remember that what happened after that is she went from the very zenith of power after the Bangladesh war and fell down within 3 short years to the very nadir when she declared the emergency and snatched away democratic rights from the very same Indian people who had worshipped her as a goddess. So the same people who worshipped her as a goddess, in 3 years' time, they began to hate her, and within 5 years, she was out of power. So that is the sort of rise and fall of Indira Gandhi in those 5 precipitous years that shows, in a way, the way she was able to wield power and also shows the limits of power. And then, of course, she was able to return to power. So,
and I think there was this very powerful interview by Jonathan Dimbleby, the Thames Television.
Yeah.
So I think it is very popular on the TV. And I watched that, and I have a question for you from that. What was the greatest political sin that Indira Gandhi committed?
Well, Latha, I think her greatest political sin was declaring the emergency. Declaring the emergency, but you know, Indira Gandhi was a half-hearted dictator because she imposed the emergency, but unlike any other dictator in the world, she revoked her own dictatorship. She imposed her own dictatorship, but then revoked her own dictatorship and submitted to the power of the vote. You know, she needn't have done that. The emergency could have gone on perpetually. The emergency could have gone on for 20 years. She could, you know, at that time, there were people like Bansi Lal, who was the then defense minister, who was saying, "Arey madam, ye election chhodiye. Abhi, you know, forget about these elections. Let's just have you as ruler for life. Let's have you as president for life." She didn't do that. She imposed the emergency. She then called elections. And then when the electoral verdict came in, she submitted to the verdict. She took the verdict. Maybe she called elections because she thought she was going to win. But even so, when she didn't win, she accepted the verdict. So she accepted the verdict and she left power. So I think in that sense, she was a dictator, but she was a half-hearted dictator. I think at some level, she was Jawaharlal Nehru's daughter. She had been reared in the democratic tradition. You know, she was a Democrat gone rogue. But in many senses, she did come from a democratic tradition, and I think she didn't betray it because paradoxically, the power of the vote was reinforced. You know, she took away the power of the vote. But then Indian citizens realized that however powerful a leader, you can be controlling the government, controlling the party, controlling the levers of state, you can be controlling everything, but still with the power of the vote, the Indian citizen can bring you down. So maybe Mr. Modi should realize that. You know, that you can be all powerful, but still there is the power of the vote. So, I mean, in that sense, she illustrates what happens to personality cults, what happens to absolute rulers, what happens to people who take on dictatorial powers, is that, they still can be defeated by the vote. And she let herself be defeated by the vote. I told this to Mr. Chidambaram, that when we were having a discussion in Delhi, and I told Mr. Chidambaram, the former finance minister, that look at Indira Gandhi. She was defeated in 1977, completely routed. She lost everything. The Congress was thrown out of India. But within 2 years of her defeat in 1977, she was back in power with a 2/3 majority. So if the Indira Gandhi could do it, why can't the Congress party similarly come back to power? So Mr. Chidambaram looked very mournful and said, yes, but Indira Gandhi was up against Morarji Desai. We are up against Mr. Modi. So what can we do? So that was his feeling. But it was certainly true that she lost power in 1977, but within 2 years of losing power, within just 2.5 years of losing power, she's back with a 2/3 majority.
All of us who grew up in the Nehruvian era, Nehru was Indira's papu, and he was always for the public ideal father. And in this book, reading this book, I was scandalized to read that Nehru's relationship with Indira was not that good. Actually,
that's very well pointed out, because normally the picture we have is Nehru and Indira as a very sort of loving father-daughter relationship. But no, it was a relationship full of hurt. It was a relationship full of anger. It was a relationship full of disappointment. Indira Gandhi was not brilliant at her studies. She failed in, didn't do well in Shantiniketan, and she failed to get a degree in Oxford. Imagine that, Jawaharlal Nehru's daughter failing to get an Oxford degree. This was terrible for Nehru, and Indira herself was engulfed with shame and anguish. And in a way, almost as an act of rebellion against her father, she went off and instantly married Feroz Gandhi. It was as if, I don't care about you. I know I haven't lived up to your expectations. I know I can't pass the exams you want me to pass. I didn't get an Oxford degree. Now I'm going to go and marry the man you don't like. Because Nehru did not like Feroz Gandhi and was against the marriage and, opposed the marriage. And, of course, Mahatma Gandhi had to step in and say that, look, listen, this is a personal matter. And you must let them get married. So that's when Nehru came around. But her decision to marry Feroz Gandhi was almost like a rebellion against her father, because she knew that she had failed to live up to her father's expectations. India's freedom fight, India's founding fathers were bad fathers. They were not very good fathers. They had great expectations of their children. They wanted their children to be brilliant and committed and driven by political ambition and capable of sacrifice and capable of commitment and capable of political endurance and capable of idealism. They expected their children to jump through the hoops of greatness constantly. And many of their children could not live up to these expectations. As you know, the Harilal could not live up to Mahatma Gandhi's expectations. And in the same way, Indira Gandhi could not live up to her father's expectations. Nehru was brilliant. He was very physically fit. He was into sports. He hated any kind of illness. And Indira Gandhi was often very ill. And Nehru detested illness. For him, illness was a sign of moral weakness, So he was Nehru was a terrific practitioner of yoga. He could stand on the Shirsasana in the middle of the room. And it was a source of great concern to him that Indira Gandhi could not stand on her head. He used to keep writing her letters saying, why are you not able to do the Shirsasana? And you should be able to do it, and you should wake up in the morning, and you should stand on your head, and everything will be sorted out if you stand on your head. But the poor thing could not stand on her head. So, this was really difficult for Nehru to deal with. So she could not live up to her father's expectations. And in that sense, in a way, I think, my interpretation in the book is that because she couldn't live up to her father's expectations, she became even more politically ambitious, almost as if to say, well, look, Papu, you don't think I'm good enough, but I'm going to be prime minister. I'm going to be more powerful than you ever were, and I'm going to turn your democracy upside down. So maybe the emergency was a kind of private, revolt against Nehru's constitutional democracy, where she always felt that her father was too weak, too accommodating, he always worked by consensus. She, on the other hand, demonstrated power, as I said, and she used ruthless means to demonstrate power. So, in some senses, her politics was a repudiation of her father's constitutional democracy. It was a repudiation of her father's ideals. And in a way, I think it was her own private little war that she had against her papu.
And what about the big men in her life?
Yeah.
There are so many, especially when I think in Kerala, most of us might have read the book by M.O. Mathai,
Yeah.
which was really shocking and scandalous, I should tell you. I mean, you cannot imagine Indira Gandhi, a woman who is very much interred in our spirit, to be involved in such a scandal. Or what are the real stories that you might have to tell us?
I think she was sexually quite liberated. And I think that she, for example, she and Feroz lived together in London before they got married. Eric Hobsbawm, the historian, who was a great friend of P.N. Huxar, who was a contemporary of theirs, says that every time he visited P.N. Huxar, he would find Indu and Feroz there sitting on a sofa holding hands. So she was living with Feroz before she got married. And yes, she had a relationship with M.O. Mathai. I think Mathai has given very graphic descriptions of it, but she was, she was a free spirit, and by then she and her husband were estranged. Feroz was pursuing his own extracurricular activities. As one of his friends said, Feroz was someone who was always struck by Cupid's arrow. He was certainly having his own life, and she had her own life, and it was a very different time. It was a time when the ideals of the freedom movement were very alive, when the ideals of rejecting conventional mores was very prevalent, when the idea of a personal morality that had nothing perhaps to do with conventions and mores was very much alive. So I think she certainly had a very liberated personal morality. And she thought of herself as a free, independent spirit and very much part of the socialist revolution of the 1930s. So I think her self-image was not not at all the middle-class conventional Bahu Beti at all. As I've often said, she was in many ways a man in a sari. She was as I've always said, she was India's first Dabang, India's first Bahubali. But she was, in that sense, someone who was personally, in fact, as far as her personal morality was concerned, quite liberated.
I think she has also mentioned, as the book closes, about a story or an anecdote about her visit to US when the president asked her secretary, how should I address IG? IG is a short form for Indira Gandhi, and IG was a short form for most of her colleagues in the cabinet.
And she said, my cabinet colleagues call me Prime Minister, my cabinet colleagues call me Sir, so please tell the President of the United States he should call me Prime Minister Sir. So that's how she saw herself, as Prime Minister Sir. But of course, she was a great enthusiast of the feminine side as well. As you know, she was a great enthusiast for saris. And I'll share this one anecdote, which, when she was traveling around in the rural areas on one of her trips, and she was standing in an open jeep. And in those days, leaders used to stand on open jeeps and wave to the crowd because there was no security consideration in those days. So she was standing on an open jeep and waving to the crowd, and behind her was sitting the intelligence official known as Mr. J.P. Dutt. He was an intelligence official by the name of Mr. Dutt. And she was waving her arm and waving at the crowd, and suddenly she says, Mr. Dutt, can you tell me what kind of sari that lady is wearing there in the crowd? So the intelligence official says, Madam, I really don't know what kind of sari. It must be some silk sari. So she turned around and said, it is not a silk sari, Mr. Dutt. It's a handloom sari from Coimbatore. Now, what kind of intelligence are you gathering? So that kind was the kind of, woman she was. She had a great sense of saris and of aesthetics. On another occasion, she was again traveling in the districts, and she went, in the districts you had these circuit houses, the inspection bungalow circuit houses where VIPs used to stay. And she came out of one of these bungalows and told the district magistrate there that, Mr. District Magistrate, I really appreciate that you have cleaned up this bungalow for me. I also appreciate that you have cleaned up the bathroom. And I also noticed that you have put in new towels. But please remember that when you buy new towels, you must always wash them once. Because new towels don't dry unless you wash them once. So this was the kind of housewifely, motherly, auntly advice she was capable of giving. So you had this very ruthless, dark politician, a practitioner in the dark arts of the politics, who was also an aunt and a mother. So, which is what makes her so fascinating, that here was this backroom manipulator and this puppeteer of so many different politicians. Yet at the same time, she could switch out of that mode and suddenly become the caring aunt or the caring mother, talking about saris and towels. So I think this was a kind of duality about her, which was fascinating. But, again, what was interesting to me was just how much she transcended gender. Indira Gandhi, as I said, often thought of herself as both man and woman. When she was young, her father used to call her Indu boy. Her mother used to dress her as a boy. Remember, she was the oldest child of the oldest child. And in the Indian families in the early 20th century, the oldest child of the oldest child was expected to be a male child. She was not a male child. She was a female child. And she, in her life, sought to live up to sort of male standards of physical endurance. As a young person, she was very sickly and frail. But as she grew older, she used to walk, run, swim. She would ride horses. She was a skier. And when the British journalist Bruce Chatwin once asked her that, how are you different from any other Indian politician? She said, the way I'm different is physically I'm much fitter than all of them. So she believed in physical fitness. So she thought of herself both as man and woman. And she was in many ways a man in a sari. If you see the kind of dress that she exemplified, it was the short hair, the sari, but a man's wristwatch, rather like this one. But no jewelry. She never wore any jewelry, or never any kind of accessories of femininity. So I think she was both man and woman. She was a biform human being. She often said that I'm a biform human being. I'm both man and woman. And she never actually identified as woman. She never identified herself as female, as recognizably female. So I think in that sense also she was in that sense, a very unique personality.
I would be doing an injustice if I don't ask you about her relationship with Husker. And I think that when I researched, I found him to be very, very handsome and gentle and a powerful influence on Mrs. Gandhi in shaping her political agendas.
Oh, yes. I think all of us who don't know about Mr. P.N. Huxar, we should know about him because he was really the man behind Indira Gandhi in her first term. He was handsome, he was very erudite, he was very learned, and he was in many ways responsible for the slogan Garibi Hatao, for the Bangladesh war, for splitting the Congress. And he was someone who really was a remarkable influence on her. But Huxar made the mistake of asking Indira Gandhi one question. When Sanjay Gandhi's power began to rise, he said, Mrs. Gandhi, you have to make a choice. Are you Sanjay Gandhi's mother or are you the Prime Minister of India? So as soon as he asked this question, that was the end of P.N. Huxar, and he was sacked overnight. So I think in some senses, Indira Gandhi created dynastic politics in democracy. You know, she destroyed the power of the Rajkumars outside politics. She took away the privy purses, but she instituted a Rajkumar in politics. So she brought the monarchical principle into democracy. I think that was again the signal contribution of Indira Gandhi, because Nehru was not like that. You know, Nehru never thought of Indira Gandhi, that Indira Gandhi would succeed him as prime minister. There are letters that Nehru has written to Vijay Lakshmi Pandit saying that Indira is not a, you know, she's a, you know, Nehru, you know, this was a revelation to me as I researched the book, that he didn't really have a very high opinion of her. He thought she was, you know, she was very good and she was very tasteful. She had good taste. She could choose good curtains. She was a good hostess. But I don't think he had a high opinion of her intellect or her political abilities. And I think Nehru would never have imagined that she would succeed him as prime minister. So I think all the people who say that Nehru groomed her are completely wrong, because there's no evidence to show that Nehru had in any way wanted her to become prime minister, because Nehru's chosen successor, of course, was Lal Bahadur Shastri. So it was Indira Gandhi who actually brought dynastic politics into democracy, because as far as she was concerned, the place of a son could only be taken by another son. And it's the Nehru-Gandhi family that would rule India. This was the conviction that Indira Gandhi had. That is my family, my bloodline, my inheritance, who will rule India. So in that sense, she wasn't a Democrat at all, actually. She was much more of an authoritarian feudal leader who practiced democracy, but who didn't quite believe in the precepts of democratic procedures.
Coming to that point, I think she destroyed 36 governments.
Yes.
And how would you think that, I mean, do you think that she systematically destroyed Congress party?
Oh, yes. I mean, you know, the Congress party of today is not the Congress party of Nehru and Gandhi. She split the Congress in 1969. She split the Congress in 1978. So, and she made it entirely about her family. So the Congress you have today is the Congress Indira. And anyone within the party or even outside the party who dared to raise his head, off with his head. You know, like the Queen of Hearts, off with his head. So she would not tolerate any dissent. She would not tolerate any rivals. She would not tolerate anyone with any kind of independent thinking. She was, in that sense, a highly autocratic, centralizing leader. And of course, it had terrible consequences, because she did not permit the rise of regional parties. She didn't permit the rise of regional parties in Kashmir, nor did she permit in Punjab, which is what led to the kind of bloody politics that happened, which took her life in the end. So I think the inability of the Congress to deal with political, you know, with regional political leaders was something that, that she paid a very heavy price for. She could not tolerate any form of dissent. You know, Nayantara Sehgal has a lovely line that any form of political virility alerted her to grave danger. So in that sense, unlike Nehru, Nehru dealt with his compatriots with no insecurity and with comfort. In fact, he wanted opposition, he wanted dissent, he wanted disagreement from his peers. But Indira Gandhi was simply not comfortable with any kind of rival or any kind of independent thinking within her party or even outside the political system, which is why I think she did so much damage to Indian politics, and she did so much damage to the Congress party. So poor Rahul Gandhi, you know, I mean, in that sense, you know, we of course blame him for a lot of things, but Dadi kind of messed up big time.
Now, this book is a part of, I should say, commendable research, because you had to tackle she had to tackle almost 150 biographies and many controversial polemical writings about Mrs. Gandhi, which is even now adding a lot of complexity to the image of Indira Gandhi as a prime minister. What were your experiences in representing Indira Gandhi as true to her life? What were the greatest challenge that you experienced?
Well, that's a very good question. And as you rightly pointed out, the wealth of available material. You know, there are 120 biographies on her. I read 80. Of course, before I come to that, I want to also tell, audiences in Kerala here that, of course, the dismissal of the EMS Namboothiripat government, as you know, in 1956 was one of the first signs of the authoritarian centralizing leader that she was, because when the communists came to power, that was the, in 1956 when she dismissed the EMS government. But no, I think in that sense, the challenge for me was the wealth of material, the sheer wealth of studies on her, that kind of was pretty overwhelming, was very overwhelming. And, the fact is that she also herself wrote a lot about herself. She gave a lot of interviews, she wrote letters, she wrote to various people about her life. So there's a huge amount of material on Indira Gandhi. And I think the challenge for me was actually to find her as a woman. I wanted to make the book about Indira Gandhi talking to a new audience, talking to the millennial audience, talking to people who are turn of the century, who perhaps have no memory of her, or perhaps know her as a shadowy figure from the past. I wanted to bring her alive. I wanted to make her talk to new audiences. I wanted young people to try and understand this very remarkable woman. And I also wanted people to understand her. I wasn't after sympathy or approval. I'm not trying in the book to make you sympathetic about Indira Gandhi or to try and make you approve of Indira Gandhi. But I'm just trying to, perhaps, I'm after historical understanding, not sympathy or approval. And that's what was motivating me, that how could this person do what she did, be as contradictory as she was, and how can we understand her? How can a new generation understand her, both as a politician and a woman? So that's the kind of guiding light I had through all this monumental material that is available on Indira Gandhi. And I have to tell you that now my book is becoming a film.
Oh, congratulations,
right.
Sagarika.
So Vidya Balan has bought the rights of the book. And so I think Vidya Balan is going to play Indira Gandhi.
Oh, that's all good news for all of us. And I should, we will conclude the session with one more question, because as a mother, like Kamala Nehru was really blessed. And for the audience, I dedicate this question. You can just very shortly tell us the beautiful relationship that existed between Kamala and Indira.
It was a very, very poignant, very touching relationship. As I've said, Indira had complicated relationships with the men in her life. She was often drawn to very dark, daring, adventurous kind of men, the very polar opposite of her father. Her father was a saintly philosopher, poet, scholar, and visionary, but that was the kind of man she rejected, and she went very much for the dark, daring, wild children. So she had that was her relationship with the men in her life, but with the women in her life, particularly her mother, she had very tender, nurturing relations. The Nehrus were a glittering, accomplished family. The family of Motilal Nehru lived in a 42-bedroom house in Allahabad. They had a swimming pool, a riding ring. They had huge acres of lawns. They had servants. They had monogram cutlery. It was a very glittering, accomplished, brilliant household. The ticket to ascent, social ascent in this household was wit and professional achievement and beauty. And Kamala Nehru, who was Jawaharlal's wife, came into this glittering, accomplished household, a complete misfit. Kamala was shy, she was traditional, she could not speak English, she was not sophisticated. She was a misfit in this highly achieving, brilliant home with Jawaharlal and his two highly successful sisters, with Motilal Nehru, the grandfather, who was, of course, the richest lawyer in India. And from her earliest days, Indira Gandhi was her mother's protector. She has this very poignant line where she says, "From as long as I can remember, I had my skinny arms around my mother, protecting her from her in-laws." Because Kamala Nehru was very cruelly treated by Jawaharlal's family. She was called unsophisticated. She was called, a country bumpkin. They would say things like, oh, today we're going to watch an English movie, but of course we can't take Kamala because she can't understand English. So the dual roles that she played, that Indira played, as the protector of the underdog, the protector of the defenseless Kamala, as well as the expected, the high achieving protege of the hero father. So she had these two tendencies within her. On the one hand, the protector of the underdog and mother to the defenseless, because she, in a way, was her mother's mother. Her mother was a very frail, ailing person. It was Indira who actually became her mother's guardian and her mother's caretaker. And she wrote in letters that, I used to fight with people and quarrel with people when I saw them being mean to my mother and when I saw them being cruel to my mother. So the protector of the mother and the protege of the father. So the mother expecting protection, the father expecting physical fitness, stand on your head, run, walk, swim, read, be the best student, conquer every possible academic milestone, be the best in the class, be the best in the sports field. That was what the father expected, and the mother, on the other hand, expecting only protection. So these two tendencies, in a way, reflected her politics. Because, when you see things like Garibi Hatao, it was again the sort of defenseless, the protector of the defenseless, the protector of the poor, the protector of the underdog, which is how she grew up being with her mother. And I think, in a sense, her mother's religiosity, I think Kamala sought a lot of comfort in religion. And in a way, the religiosity that Indira Gandhi later on adopted was in a way to feel close to her mother. And, her relationship with Feroz Gandhi as well was actually created because Feroz was very close to Kamala Nehru. And they were both equally close to Kamala, and they were both equally protective of her. So I think it was very interesting that this child of privilege and this child of such high-achieving parents was also someone who was so constantly protective of the mother and so always constantly protective of someone she thought of as very defenseless and as very frail. So the two sides in her were very clearly defined. Her father's family, very high achieving, very glittering, and the mother's family, traditional, soft-spoken, modest. So the two sides, there was a kind of schizophrenia in her about the two sides of her personality.
And as we conclude, we have time for 2 or 3 questions. And before I conclude, I should say that this book was an amazing reading experience for an English teacher like me. And I should tell you that you have the best compendium of material, and it is a pot boiler, brilliantly conceived by Sagarika, I should tell you, and gently insightful. And I think I was amazed at her inimitable light touch and the way she squeezes a complex morass of biography of a woman who would daunt history and would remain as an enigma in each one of us, making us wonder what it is to be a woman. Thank you. So I invite questions from the audience.
Before we take questions, can I just read one extract?
Oh, please.
I just want to read one extract from the book, which I think will sum up for you the kind of person she was and the kind of indomitable spirit she had and the tenacity she had. Because if there's one thing that Indira Gandhi was all about, it was sheer tenacity of spirit. I'll just read the Belchi one. Yeah. So, yeah, I'll just read that bit. So in 1977, she had lost power. Now remember, after losing power, she was thrown out. She had no job, she had no post, she had no home, she had no official car, she had nothing. She was politically, many said Indira Gandhi is finished. But she was determined to come back to center stage. She was determined to go back to politics. And she was determined to find a political moment. And her return was made possible by a political moment which she seized and she used very expertly to return to the political center stage. In June 1977, Harijans were massacred in the town of Belchi. Belchi is a remote town in the heart of dacoit country in Bihar. And by going to Belchi, Indira Gandhi struck a kind of symbolic, spectacular note that enabled her to return to power. Because to get to Belchi, she had to go by car, then by train, then by jeep, then by tractor, and finally by elephant. So she had to make this tortuous journey to Belchi. And in the process of doing so, she did it in full glare of the cameras, managed to catapult herself back into the front page of the newspapers. So I'll just read out the way she did it. "No lunch, let us leave," said Indira Gandhi firmly. "But you can't go there, madam. The route is bad. No car will reach." "So what?" said Mrs. Gandhi. "We will go on walking. We will go on walking even if it takes us all night." Outside the town of Bihar Sharif, the road petered into a muddy track. The jeep got stuck. A tractor was pressed into service. Even that got stuck. Indira Gandhi was walking through the mud. "Madam, please don't go there. There is waist-deep water." But Indira Gandhi was still marching on, her sari raised above her ankle. "Of course I can wade through water," she snapped. A thoughtful local suggested an elephant. "Madam, please go on an elephant." Another said, "But how will you climb an elephant?" "Of course I will climb an elephant," said Indira Gandhi. "This is not the first time I've ridden an elephant. Bahut dino baad haathi pe chal rahi hu." As Moti the tusker heaved up, with Indira Gandhi on its back and a terrified companion clinging to her, the accompanying cameraman cried out, "Long live Indira Gandhi." The sky was thunderous. The river was in spate. Light was failing and a thunderstorm gathered on the horizon. But on walked the doughty Moti through dangerous currents and banks of mud, carrying Indira Gandhi towards a political revival. The elephant had no howdah. 60-year-old Indira lurched this way and that, finding it difficult to keep her balance. But then losing her balance and yet holding on was the theme of her life these days.
Now it's time for interaction with audience. Dear audience, please ask questions based on this subject.
Namaskaram. I'm Afsar Babu from Kerala. Basically, I'm a teacher in English, higher secondary. You said very detailedly that the body language, the look, everything that Indira Gandhi, the legend politician of India and the womanhood of India, gave a wonderful appearance and a presentation international level. Fine. I have seen two, videos. In one video, I was really, wondered. The presidents of America once, when she visited, America, and also the prime ministers of Britain, they were very, calmly and, peacefully waiting just to get a handshake from Indira Gandhi, right? And the kind of body language they showed on their face altogether. That is one thing. Second thing, the language ability, the proficiency in English, stylish and a selected use of language that she had, whether it had any, impact or good fact in her charismatic leadership. That's one question I'd like to ask. And the second question that directly to your book, that you said that it was from Indira Gandhi that Indian National Congress started its destruction, right? And how is that? Indira Gandhi distracted Congress party, but the rule that she performed, gave any good, quality or power to India, especially in international perspective. One thing I would like to attract your attention is that in one interview in the newsroom of BBC in Britain, during the time of emergency, the anchor asked her, what are you going to do back India just to solve the matter there? Very angrily, she replied that it's none of your business, that we Indians will discuss back home. And she cut, the interview. How was her rule for India to making India a powerful country? Thank you.
I think you have touched on a very important subject. I think it was not just the way she looked and the way she conducted herself, but she gave India a tremendous profile internationally. It was said about her that she was like an international bird of paradise. When she came into the room, every eye turned to her. And her contemporaries at the time, Sirimavo Bandaranaike and Golda Meir of Israel and Sirimavo Bandaranaike of Sri Lanka, were completely put in the shade by Indira Gandhi. She used to take a lot of pains over her appearance, her hair, her saris. She spoke English, she spoke French, she spoke German. She was able to, of course, speak fluent Hindustani. So she was, in fact, a multilingual person. And the Bangladesh war, I think, established that India was not a banana republic. India was not some third world despot. India was a major power which would pursue its national interest in the way it thought fit. Indira Gandhi would look the white man in the eye. Indira Gandhi would look at Richard Nixon in the eye. And Indira Gandhi would stand up for the interests of India and for the enlightened self-interest of India. So she did a tremendous job for India's prestige abroad. She was a rock star abroad. The reason why I think she destroyed the Congress party, or because she began the process of destruction, is because by splitting it twice, she made it entirely about her own cult of personality, her own power, her own family. She didn't empower the party structure. There were very talented congressmen like Devraj Ars, like Swaran Singh, like Y.B. Chavan, like Jagjeevan Ram, who were thwarted by her and went ahead and formed their own political parties because she didn't give them opportunities. So I think the restriction of power only to herself and to her own family, I think that was what began the destruction of the Congress party.
We have time for 2 more questions.
Dear audience, please ask concise question only.
Madam, here I endorse the views of P. Shivanath. In his book, She Tughlaq, he portrays that it is because of paid propagandists and paid sycophants, Indira Gandhi achieved an iconic status. And in another anecdote, he says that it was a sort of obituary doctrine of JP's death while he was living to make him a very disabled man. So it was by intellectually manipulating or doctoring her cult status. There was a lot of incidents to quote. I endorse the Shivnath's view.
In many ways, psychophancy is the scourge of third world societies. Psychophancy is the evil of our democracy. Psychophancy is something that Jawaharlal Nehru tried very hard to destroy. But psychophancy is something that Indira Gandhi created and thrived on and used to build her own personality cult. In many ways, she did not take Jayaprakash Narayan seriously. She did not refuse to negotiate with Jayaprakash Narayan, did not reconcile with Jayaprakash Narayan. But Jayaprakash Narayan was also not without controversy, because he was asking the army and the police not to obey instructions. He was giving a call for mutiny. Jayaprakash Narayan was calling on the army not to obey the instructions of the civilian government. So if Jayaprakash Narayan's opinions had held, there may have been armed martial law in India. Because what happened in the emergency? Jayaprakash Narayan was telling the army, don't obey the orders of the civilian. Now in the Indian structure, the civilian authority is supreme. The civilian authority is supreme over the army. If you tell the army that don't obey the civilian authority, then you're asking the army to take over. So that is what Indira Gandhi, when she gave her rationale as to why she imposed the emergency, she said, because if I haven't imposed the emergency, Jayaprakash Narayan was inviting the army in. So Jayaprakash Narayan had his own frailties, but I agree with you, she should have shown greater reconciliation towards the movement that Jayaprakash Narayan led, instead of coming down and destroying democracy the way she did with the emergency.
I mean, we have, ma'am.
Ma'am, you have talked about how powerful Indira Gandhi was, and the title of your book itself is the most powerful prime minister. And two parts, you have said that she was a man in a sari and India's first Bahubali, and you have compared her to men over there. And why to do so when she was herself a powerful woman who proved herself?
Good question. That's a very good question. But, she never thought of herself as a woman. She was often asked, are you going to take up this woman's cause? Are you a feminist? She denied being a feminist. She often said, I am not a feminist. I am not going to take up women's causes. She didn't want to be boxed into the Zanana Dabba. She didn't be boxed into the ladies' compartment. So in her feeling, she did not want to be part of any kind of women's movement. She did not want to be part of any kind of feminist movement. There's a very strong denial of any form of feminism in Indira Gandhi, which is very interesting to me. Because as you rightly said, she was a very powerful woman. And she enjoyed her femininity. But she refused to identify as a woman. I think she identified more as a non-gender person. She was neither man nor woman, or perhaps man and woman. She said that I'm a biform human being. I'm man and woman. So I think she was beyond, in that sense, gender. Indira Gandhi was the national center stage. She was the nationalist center. She would not be seen with any NGOs or going to the students of JNU or going to feminist, demonstrations or environment, the way the Congress is doing now, which is all to the good, because I think these are democratic movements that parties should be part of. But Indira Gandhi was not part of those movements. She was the nationalist center. She did not want to be boxed into any kind of marginal identity. And to her at that time, being a woman was perhaps a marginal identity. And she wanted to be center stage without gender. So I think the reason why I call her a man in a sari is because she rejected the feminist, she rejected feminism all her life.
So we, I think she will take one more question.
So nice. No, it was so good. It was such a wonderful audience.
Ma'am, good evening. The book has to be good because it is written by you. Because I have seen your debates on TV and articles on HT, etc. I have been reading it regularly. Now, what I want to ask is, how can we see a book on Mr. Modi? And if, when it comes, will it be covering the positives also? Because as you are describing Indira Gandhi, I could see Modi also a very stern man, very lot of qualities of Indira Gandhi. So I want a relationship. If you write, thank you.
I don't think Mr. Modi would like me to write a book on him, but I'd be happy to do it. And as far as I'm concerned, I approach the subject with objectivity. I'm not after approval, I'm not after sympathy, but I do want to understand the person. And I have been scathing on Indira Gandhi's politics, but I've tried to understand her as a person. So while I would like to be similarly objective about Mr. Modi, but in these days, objectivity about Mr. Modi is really not a very happy thing, because then the bhakts will get after you and you'll be called anti-national and Pakistani agent and prostitute and, Desh Drohi and all of that. So it's very difficult at this point in time to be objective about Mr. Modi. But I think that Mr. Modi does admire Indira Gandhi. The BJP RSS attacks Nehru, it attacks Sonia Gandhi, it attacks Rahul Gandhi, but they never attack Indira Gandhi. Indira Gandhi is not someone who the BJP RSS will ever attack. How can you attack the heroine of the Bangladesh war? How can you attract the great nationalist who imposed the emergency and was a great national heroine? But she was the one who banned the RSS. She put the RSS in jail. She had all the RSS Jan Sangh leaders bundled up and all put in jail. And she fired on the cow agitation. In 1966, when the sadhus marched on the parliament, she said, I will not be cowed down by cow savers. And she actually opened fire on the protesters. So she was very tough on them. But they really quite love her, I think.
So we can all wish that Sagarika would come with another inspiring book, which will be the precious lifeblood of a master spirit, and the generations will not willingly let die. All our prayers and best wishes for a great book that is going to come.
Latha, thank you very much. Your words ennoble, inspire, and enlighten this interaction. As always, you enhance our interaction with the, with your words and with the beauty of your appreciation and your warmth. Thank you so much for being part of this interaction, and thank you so much for listening.